be reading about revolutionary women and children. So it's all about kids like you during the Revolutionary War. They were sneaky and they were spies. Okay, let's check it out, Connor. Would you have been a spy in the Revolutionary War?
Probably.
Alright, fair enough.
I don't know. I like being a spy. So.
Yeah, like hiding and sneaking around. Well, that declaration did it. We Americans announced that we were free, and then we had to make it real. England wasn't going to give up her colonies without a fight. In 1775, King George proclaimed that the colonies were in rebellion. But that Declaration of Independence in 1776 changed the nature of the conflict. It said that we no longer wanted to be colonists. This wasn't a little family squabble anymore. It had become a war to found a nation. It was a war for a revolutionary idea. The idea that people could rule themselves. And so it was called the American Revolution. It was a people's war. And people means men, women, and children. It wasn't only the men who would do battle. The British officer told his general that if all the men in America were killed, we should have enough to do to conquer the women. One British soldier wrote home to England, "Even in their dresses, the females seem to bid us defiance. On their shoes, they wear something that resembled their flag of 13 stripes." Margaret Corbin was 23 when her husband went to war. She went with him. When he was killed, Molly Corbin took his cannon and kept firing. Another Molly, Mary Hayes, also filled her husband's place at a cannon, but she was remembered for dodging shells as she carried a water pitcher to thirsty soldiers. She was known as Molly Pitcher. Deborah Sampson disguised herself as a man. She served as a soldier for 3 years and was wounded twice, but took care of her own wounds to avoid being found out. Then she came down with a fever and ended up in a field hospital. That's where an amazed doctor learned the truth. The doctor took Deborah Sampson to his house to care for her. When his niece decided she wanted to marry the handsome soldier, the doctor decided he would have to tell Sampson's general the truth. In later years, Sampson went on a speaking tour telling of army life. So Deborah Sampson is actually from right around Wareham and Carver, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she's out there near Plimpton. I think she lived in Plimpton for a while.
I have no idea.
And ended up in Middleborough, I think. So she's actually from around here, and she did speaking tours at elementary schools all around the state, so it's kind of cool. And she was so brave. I don't even know if I could do this. She was shot in the leg, and she didn't want a doctor to do surgery on her because then they'd find out she's a woman, so she took out the bullet herself. That's pretty brave. All right. I don't know. Could you handle that, Con? I don't know.
No, I
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Anna Marie Lane was the only woman to receive a Revolutionary War soldier's pension from the Virginia Assembly. Deborah Sampson did get a war pension from Massachusetts. She enlisted in the army with her husband, but only he knew she was a woman. It wasn't that hard to keep it a secret. Soldiers rarely bathed, and they slept in their uniforms. Lane fought in 4 major battles until she, too, was discovered by an army doctor after being wounded. How many women fought and weren't discovered? Well, if they weren't discovered and didn't write it down later, we'll never know. Most women stayed home during the war, but they did things they hadn't done before. They had to do all the men's work as well as their own. They ran farms and businesses, sewed clothes for soldiers, and helped make gunpowder and cannonballs. When battles were fought near the homes, women fed and cared for the wounded. Some women followed the army, acting as cooks and laundresses. Children were a part of it too. An observer in Massachusetts watched children making cartridges, running bullets, making wallets, and baking biscuit. Women who were loyalists had a terrible time of it. Usually had to keep quiet or leave the country. Molly Brant, Sir William Johnson's Mohawk widow, fought with the Iroquois on the side of the Great Britain. It was said that one word from her goes farther with the Iroquois than 1,000 from any white man. Johnson had died in 1774. Some people believe that he too would have fought for the British. It was England that tried to honor the Indian treaties. Others said that if Johnson were alive, it was he, not Washington, who would have been general of the armies. Women and children acted as spies for both sides. They were not likely to be suspected. Some women were innkeepers and listened as they served beer to the soldiers. Many had to face the terrors of war on their own. Smallpox moved through the country as the armies moved. Soldiers carried the germs. Thousands died. Soldiers, women, and children too. Women whose husbands had gone off to fight were often alone when the invading army looted and destroyed, as armies often do. Eliza Wilkinson's home in South Carolina was robbed by a British soldier. In her diary, she wrote of a day of terror and of soldiers using the most abusive language imaginable while making as if to hew us to pieces with their swords. On Long Island, Lydia Minturn Post was forced to quarter enemy soldiers in the house. When they drank too much, she said, "We have trying and grievous scenes to go through, fighting, brawls, drumming and fifing, and every abomination going on under our very roofs." When it was necessary, women put guns to the shoulders. Those on the frontier were used to doing it. Many had fought Indians in those terrible raids in which right and wrong were often on both sides. Mercy Otis Warren wrote a play about the British who were blockading Boston. She titled it The Blockheads. Warren used her mind and wit to turn loyalists into patriots. So did Phyllis Wheatley. At age 7, Wheatley had wept when she stepped off a slave ship. Now she was writing patriotic poems praised by George Washington. And she did get to sit and meet with George Washington. They had a meeting together. And Washington said it enlightened his mind how smart African Americans could be, I guess. So it helped change his mind about slavery. Martha Washington had never been outside Virginia when she got into a coach and headed for Massachusetts to join her husband. People cheered her along the way. She proved that she was made of strong fiber during cold months spent in army camps. Eliza Pinckney saw much of her wealth disappear. The war was hard on the Pinckney plantations. Instead of complaining, she said she was probably better off with moderation and prosperity. Some American women were independent already, although John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and other men in Philadelphia weren't ready to acknowledge it. That was a subject on which they were obtuse. That word means thick-headed. When it came to equality for women, Adams and the other delegates ignored the subject. John Adams had no excuse at all for being obtuse on women's equality. His wife Abigail kept telling him that all his talk about independence and freedom was a little strange if he couldn't understand that half of the population was not free. And women weren't really free. They were ruled by their fathers or husbands. They couldn't vote. They had no representation. Here's the way Abigail Adams said it in a letter to John. "Whilst you are proclaiming peace and goodwill to men, you insist upon retaining an absolute power over wives. But you must remember that arbitrary power is like most other things, which are very hard, very liable to be broken." In another letter she wrote, "In the new code of laws, I desire you remember the ladies. If particular care and attention are not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound to obey any laws in which we have no voice or representation. Women weren't the only ones who weren't free. Abigail knew that. In another letter to John, she wrote, "It has always appeared a most iniquitous scheme to me to fight ourselves for what we are daily robbing from those who have as good a right to freedom as we have." She was talking about slaves and slavery. All right. And I know I've already talked to you, the class, at what a good woman Abigail Adams was, ahead of her time against slavery. And how she never, like, her parents actually owned slaves, and she inherited them and freed them immediately, and actually usually gave them jobs or a house or tried to hook them up with a life, not just free them, you know. All right. Well, have a good day, and hope this week goes well for you. Good night. Good night, Connor.
Good night, Connor.